thinking a lot lately and just kind of looking at life and spiritual practice and the ideas of religion. And I have to say that there comes a point in life for a spiritual practitioner where religion really ceases to be religion. It ceases to be a thing in and of itself. And it somehow embraces life. It's something that becomes the way you see, or becomes, I guess, the laboratory in which your world works as you kind of grow to understand. And it becomes inseparable from life, just from the very practice of living, of thinking, of wondering, of observing, of seeing. And I was reading here in Walt Whitman's The Leaves of Grass, one of his most famous poems, and one of the first poems in there is The Song of Myself. And in the introduction, some very amazing things are said that I thought I would share with you. It says here that they tempt us to conclude that Song of Myself was merely a journalist's report, inspired but uneven, of popular culture in the 1850s. It was something more than that, and something vastly different from any of its literary sources. He goes on to say, I might suggest that the real nature of the poem becomes clearer when it is considered in relation to quite another list of works, even though Whitman probably had read none of them by 1855. Most of them could not have been read because they were not yet written, or not yet published, or not yet translated into English. That other list might include the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, Christopher Smart's long, crazy, inspired poem Jubilat Agno, Blake's prophetic books, not forgetting The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Rimbaud's Illuminations, The Chants of Maldoror, and Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, as well as the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and a compendious handbook, The Philosophies of India by Heinrich Zimmer. So he's saying that Walt Whitman's poem contained elements that he found in common with all of those writings, but that at the time that Waltman was writing, those works weren't available to him and he had not read them as of yet. I love the fact that the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is in that list. It's quite amazing that it has had that reach. He goes on here to say, what is extraordinary about this Eastern element is that Whitman, when he was writing the poems of the first edition, seems to have known little or nothing about Indian philosophy. All right, so where is this all coming from, these allusions to this deep and wonderful philosophy, this Sanatana Dharma, this fundamental truth of life, which, as we've seen through so many of these little vlogs, percolates itself up through all of the world's traditions and is identifiable in all of the world's philosophies. And so here we're seeing it percolating up into a poem, a poet's work, which had no religious affiliation or no religious purpose at all. And so the writer here, who's writing this introduction, says, what it must have been was a mystical experience in the proper sense of the term. Dr. Richard Morris Buck, the most acute of Whitman's immediate disciples, believed that it took place on a June morning in 1853 or 1854. He also believed that it was repeated on other occasions, but neither these nor the original experience can be dated from Whitman's papers. Such ecstasies consist in a rapt feeling of union or identity with God or the soul or mankind or the cosmos, a sense of ineffable joy leading to the conviction that the seer has been released from the limitations of space and time and has been granted a direct vision of truths impossible to express. I'm going to read over here one of the passages from the Song of Myself in the wider poem called Leaves of Grass. This beautiful description here that kind of gives light of what he's talking about. Swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and joy and knowledge that pass all the art and argument of the earth. And I know that the hand of God is the elder hand of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the eldest brother of my own, and that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and my lovers, and that a kelson of the creation is love, and limitless are the leaves stiff or drooping in the fields, and brown ants in the little wells beneath them, and mossy scabs of the worm fence and heaped stones, and the elder and mullein and pokeweed. A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. I guess it must be the flag of my disposition, out of hopeful green stuff woven, or I guess it is the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrancer designedly dropped, bearing the owner's name some way in the corners, that we may see and remark and say, whose? Or I guess the grass itself is a child, the produced babe of vegetation. Or I guess it is a uniform hieroglyphic, and it means sprouting alike in broad zones and narrow zones, growing among black folks as among white. Canuck, Tuckahoe, Congressman Cuff, I give them the same. I receive them the same. So this beautiful living of life and observing it, we see it just in the way that Whitman is talking about his experience here on the earth, and that inquiring mind, the mind of the spiritual seeker that is always observing, always trying to understand and trying to look beyond the surface, beyond the apparent, to something that seems like it must be obvious and yet is just out of sight, hidden behind the curtain somehow. And in this experience, he writes and betrays the Sanatana Dharma, this knowledge of the divine. He goes on and says, "It is to be noted that there is no argument about the real occurrence of such ecstasies. They have been reported, sometimes in sharp detail, by men and women of many different nations, at many historical periods, and each report seems to bear a family resemblance to the others. Part of the resemblance is a feeling universally expressed by mystics, that they have acquired a special sort of knowledge, not learned from others, but directly revealed to the inner eye." So all of that from Walt Whitman, The Leaves of Grass, a rather unsuspecting source of such an inspiration.